Every MC has one card that he gets to play once during an event, which is the needs no introduction card. And so for our next session, I am going to use that card and call up Eric Schmidt, the executive chairman of Alphabet Inc., which operates a little subsidiary called Google that you've probably heard of. And Nicolas Barré is going to be talking to him for the next 30 minutes. So I hope you have as much fun as I'm going to have. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, hi everyone. Hi VivaTech. Well, we're so honored to have you with us this afternoon. Eric, you flew all the way from Mountain View, I believe. So thank you for being here. You're, of course, the executive chairman.
And I should
Alphabet.
say, it's wonderful to be in Paris.
Thank you.
Always is.
Alphabet is the parent company of Google, of course. It has several subsidiaries that most of you use every day, like YouTube and others. So today we're going to talk about entrepreneurship. We're going to talk about the French tech scene, about the European startup scene, about many other subjects. But perhaps for our audience, could you tell us briefly why at Google you decided last year a year ago to change your organization completely and to create Alphabet?
Great. Well, thank you. So first place, I'm really glad everybody here is at VivaTech. We're a strong supporter of VivaTech, and we're a strong supporter of the creation of the next generation of entrepreneurial companies here in France and around the world. In our case, Google had so many other initiatives that it was difficult to keep them all under the Google name. So we did something typical of Google. We did something unusual. We created a parent company, which is Alphabet. Alphabet in the sense of letters, and Google became the G, right? And we now have room to have other companies. So we, for example, have announced a company called Verily, which is a healthcare and medical company. It's quite interesting. We have Nest, which of course is the N, which does home automation. We have DeepMind, which does AI research. That's of course the D, and so forth. So it's a way of running the company with CEOs below the three of us who are driven to make those companies successful in different markets.
Okay. There is one area where we all want to see progress more than any other area, which is health, of course. In what sense can digital bring hope in this field? What do you expect from progress in this area? Will we all live over 100 years old, etc.? What kind of impact can we expect from
I can give you a couple of examples in Verily's case already. Diabetes is a disease that's going to touch literally 1 billion people on the earth very soon. And the Verily team invented a contact lens by taking doctors, scientists, and programmers and put a computer inside of a contact lens which changes color based on your glucose state. For people who have to prick themselves to determine their glucose state, this is a lifesaver. So that's a good example of digital technology in a contact lens. Another example is we figured out a way to put nanoparticles into people who might be precancerous to detect early cancer, right? Again, measurement. So we believe that the application of digital technology in mental health, in heart disease, in many cancers, will revolutionize the industry. And we're not the only one, by the way. There are many startups that are working in this area. I personally believe that that will be the largest next new industry, right? The sort of medical technology, medical science, biology. I'll give you another example. Many of you don't wear a watch anymore because you use your phone as a clock, except for appearance. But if a watch were also a health device, if that watch were also doing transdermal monitoring, and the watch was smart enough to use Wi-Fi to call your phone and say, call the doctor and tell Eric to go to the hospital, right? That technology is coming. So I think all of us in 5 to 10 years will be wearing watches that have a medical component to help keep us healthy.
But it's already here.
The technology works, and it's a question now of productizing and price and those sorts of things.
There's another area where Google sees a lot of opportunities. Of course, it's artificial intelligence. Could you give us first maybe some examples of how this will change our lives? In what fields will it really have an impact?
It's probably worth saying where we are now and where we'll be in the future. Today, there are, again, large industries, also represented here at VivaTech, who are busy building products that use what is called narrow AI. And this is typically vision. So a simple way you can see this is if you use Google Photos from Google, it will take all your photos and it will classify them using machine learning technology. We also can, for example, on a phone, you can speak in English and it will come out on the other end in French. And that's done using traditional translation based on machine learning. This means, go ahead.
Yes, but when will it really be
well, it depends.
Working well? I mean,
but if you're in a...
Sometimes it gives some clumsy translations.
Well, it's not perfect, but it gets better. The technology just gets better. For example, our voice recognition has improved 20% year over year for many years, and it will continue with more training. It's not as good as the best humans, but it's good enough to communicate now. And in fact, something like 20 or 30% of the searches are now voice searches, so it gives you a sense that we're beginning to be able to develop it. But to me, these are baby steps toward a bigger project. And the bigger project is to use this technology to make people smarter. And the example I would use there is we're working on technology which would allow you to respond to your email. So last year we brought out a product which was called Smart Reply. And what it would do is it would take your email and it would reply for you. Now, everyone here in the audience would love to have their email replied to by the computer so they don't spend all their time replying it. So we rolled it out, and the most popular reply that it gave to our corporate users was, "I love you." So that was a bug. So we're fixing those sorts of things. We've just announced an instant messaging product, which will also suggest replies to your instant messaging product, and it will be better quality. So eventually, and I would say 5 to 10 years, we will all have assistants that help give us advice. Think of it as a very smart assistant. And everybody here would benefit by having an assistant that just made you smarter. It would say, "Eric, you've been in Paris. You said this and it was wrong. Maybe you shouldn't say it again." That kind of advice should be possible in that period.
Of course, there are probably lots of privacy issues in there that you have to deal with as well.
Well, in the case of the examples that I'm using, they're completely opt-in by you. So if you don't want to use them, don't use them, right?
Okay.
But you have to say, "Hey, I want to use this." But I think most people will choose to use these tools because they make them smarter, they make them cooler, they make them literally just better at what they do.
Just wanted to get back to this translation system. What's the time frame here? When will I be able to speak through a device and have with a Chinese guy and have his answers in Mandarin live?
So that's
is it
true,
something like in 5 years?
No, it's true today. It's just a question of the quality.
We all know it's
and the quality gets better, or this is important, the quality gets better with scale. So as we get more users and more training, we get better and better, and it will eventually be as good as humans.
There's one thing that is really wonderful for the public here is that we've been able to actually see the self-driving car.
Oh yes. It's important to say that the self-driving car, I believe, is the first time it's been in Europe. So if you whatever you do, make sure to go take a look at it on your way out the front door.
And well, of course, it's a prototype, but let's dream a little bit.
Well, it's a prototype that I've been in, and what happens is you get in it.
It's working.
Not only does it work, it scares you.
And you're still alive.
Yes,
so
yes. You get in it, you close the door, and it drives you around, and there's no steering wheel. And so what the engineers did is they put a picture in front of you of what the car sees. So you can see what the laser on the car is seeing, and you can watch it turn left and right. It's fascinating.
And it's safer than it's human.
Well, it's certainly much safer than human driving. It's important to say right now that I think that there are, in France, about 5,000 deaths per year on the highways. Is that roughly right?
Yes.
In America, the number is about 33,000. Globally, that number is 1.3 million. Every one of those are often young people. It's a funeral, it's a tragedy, it's a loss of life, a loss of future life. These are very, very big deal. And I think that we should dream bigger. I think that this technology works now. I think there should be a global priority to make these things possible. The technology pretty much works. Governments need to allow it. States in America need to allow it. We're getting ready to do our public testing. I think that the sooner this happens, the sooner people will understand that it saves lives. So you should adopt self-driving cars literally because it reduces deaths. And I should mention, by the way, that you were talking about AI. How do you train a self-driving car? Well, so you drive along and it watches how a human drives, right? And if you turn left and you stop in front of a pedestrian, it learns to stop too. And you want to be careful not to overtrain it. So for example, if everyone always runs a stop sign, you want to make sure that the car does not do so.
What kind of time frame do you have in mind? I mean, when do you think that kind of technology will become, let's say, mainstream?
Well, as I said, it works right now. I believe most manufacturers have announced intentions to offer such technology in the next 2 or so years, so relatively soon. I'm familiar with European car manufacturers who've said that time frame. We have already done a partnership with Fiat Chrysler to get started. We hope to do partnerships with others as well. We have competitors in this space who are also going to do partnerships. I think this is all good. So my guess is for most of you it will be 5 to 10 years, but if you're an early adopter, it will be even sooner.
When we look at Google, it's such a big company. It's so huge. How can you expect that it will continue to grow at the same pace?
Well, I have been surprised at how big we have become and how many things we've been able to achieve. But I think part of that is because we built a system that was scalable. And the move to Alphabet means that we can add additional companies that do different things in areas where digital technology can make a difference in people's lives and the way that they run their daily existence.
Would you say that sometimes you feel that the company is even more powerful than a state, for instance?
No, in fact, I've been reminded often that we're not as powerful as states when they arrest people. So Google is very much not more powerful than a country. We are very much under the control and the laws of the countries that we operate in. Not just at the federal level, but in the case of Europe at the Brussels level, in America at the state level. And we have a large program to talk to the regulators, the governments, and so forth globally. And it's important for the technology industry, which is plenty arrogant, to remember that we're not in charge, the governments are.
How do you see, we're in Europe, how do you see the European startup scene? And more specifically, why is it that we haven't seen any European global leaders in this field?
Well, a couple of things. First, that Europe has started behind in this area. There are now quite a few unicorns, that is, companies with more than $1 billion valuation in Europe, here in Paris and London and in other places. And so there's evidence that it's happening, but it takes a while. It's important to remember that it takes 10 years to build a large company. It doesn't take 2 years. And the web, everything happened faster, but normally it takes a very long time. There is a report that's being released in conjunction with this, which is the McKinsey report on the digital frontier. And what it does is it explains the sort of gap at the technology level. And the core issue in Europe is there's not enough digitization of services. Across all the industries, the industry just doesn't use digital technology as much as it should. And the solution to that is more startups. And so everything that you all can do to create more startups in every area, in every country in Europe, is good for Europe.
But don't you think we have also a problem because it's not, we don't have a single digital European market, and it's...
So there's a huge issue that America is essentially one market.
Yeah, China is one market.
China is one large market. Brazil, by the way, is one large market. But Europe is a set of splintered markets. And I'll give you an example that if you purchase from the App Store on iTunes or the Play Store on Android, and then you move from one country to another, you may or may not be violating the law by the way you purchased your digital song. Right? So it's down to that stuff that's just crazy. And so there is agreement among the European leadership that it's important to go to a European single digital market. We favor that because it would help Google out, obviously, but it's even more important for startups who don't have the resources that Google does.
You just met the French president.
Yes, Mr. Hollande?
I mean, he's saying that France is a startup nation. Do you agree?
Well, he's certainly trying. Both Sarkozy before him, President Sarkozy and then President Hollande, have taken the initiative that France needs to be a world leader in entrepreneurship. We agree, we have partnered with both. And one way to think about it is that the educational system and the math and all of the sort of core abilities in France should produce very good software people. They should. So we know this because we hire lots of French software engineers who are very talented. So there's no issue with the talent. I think there's an issue with the cultural bias, and it's important that the cultural bias be in favor of entrepreneurs, not against them.
Okay, regulation as well?
Whether it's regulation, removing barriers. I, for example, have suggested globally that if you want to have more entrepreneurs, you have to help them become entrepreneurs. And you need to have, for small companies, fewer regulations. So for example, you could say that for most regulations, they kick in at employee number 20. So you have lots of little companies. And every once in a while, one of these little companies becomes a huge company. So all you need to do as a strategy is to have as many at-bats, as we say in American baseball, as possible. Just keep hitting. And that's the secret. All you hear about are Apple and Facebook and Google and so forth. You don't hear about all the failures. But there's a very large number of failures that you don't hear about in order to create these small number of hugely successful companies. You need to have a lot of starts.
What's your perception of this country in general? Is it a country where you think you would be ready to invest more?
Well, Google has made a decision to invest more. We've also created our Cultural Institute for the globe, and we've headquartered in Paris for obvious reasons, the talent and the art and the sort of movies and so forth and so on of France are without peer. So it seems to me that France has to decide how serious you all are about this. You have the potential. You need to do some things. You need to free the regulation of entrepreneurs. You need to give more money to your universities because they're relatively underfunded compared to the American universities. And you need to celebrate entrepreneur. After all, entrepreneur is a French word.
You have...
Right? And I did not do a study here, but there's something like 1,000 startups here in the hall. That's phenomenal. And I should say also, yes. I forgot to say that Google has offered something called Google Ventures, and we have invested in quite a few companies here in Europe. We operate a global fund of almost $500 million a year of investment, plus or minus. So we're putting a lot of money where our mouth is.
What would you say to the younger European or French generation, other than go and have a look in the Silicon Valley?
Well, but in fact, I think the great gains are probably here in Europe because Europe is behind. And so you want to start where you can grow very quickly, and if you start from behind, you can become very quick solving problems that have already been solved elsewhere. So if you accept that Europe is under-digitized, which is what the surveys indicate, and I believe, then what I would say to a young person is create a software startup in any field you care about to go solve their problems in a new way using the technology that's already been invented. That's a low-cost, low-risk strategy to create your own company to get started, and you could ultimately create a great deal of value and a great deal of wealth for yourself.
You've had some tax issues here and in other European countries. What do you need to do to put all this behind you? And
well, this one,
you know,
the tax thing is always troublesome for me because I understand the feeling, and it's real. I understand the anger and the frustration. The problem is that there's a global tax regime, if you will, that all the companies fit into, and we are just one of many companies that follow these rules. And I can tell you that we fully comply with the law, and if the law is changed, we will fully comply with it. I don't view taxes as optional. You know, they're dictated by the government, and we pay them. And I think that there is a series of initiatives under the OECD
Yes.
to try to address this over the next few years, and I'm sure that it will be addressed in a much better way through that process. But
Okay.
we have to follow the OECD rules. It's how the accounting works.
Let's talk finance a little bit and talk about valuation of some of the tech companies, because, I mean, are we in the middle of a bubble, and do you think we someday in the future will wake up like in 2000 and realize that all this is prices are vastly inflated? How do you see that?
Well, I can tell you that 1999 and 2000 were great years in the tech industry. We could do no wrong, right? Valuations were sky high, and then the crash was terrible. But the interesting thing is, after the crash, Google, for example, became stronger. So what I've learned about bubbles is that it's a bubble when it bursts, right? And today we've been saying that this has been a bubble since we bought YouTube, which was 8 years. And so it does not look like a bubble to me. It looks to me like the market is valuing companies on the scale of their forward success. In the last year, my venture capital friends are becoming more conservative. So I don't think this is a bubble. I think what you're seeing is a natural adjustment of valuations, and I think it's probably pretty healthy. And what you're going to see is here continued significant investment, perhaps at lower valuations, but the investment money is there for you to take as entrepreneurs.
Okay, so you're not that worried about these valuations?
I don't worry about the valuations so much because it's self-correcting. What I worry about is, do we have the great ideas and the strong teams? It's all about winning, right? Is your idea good enough? And I would say to you as entrepreneurs, almost all of you as entrepreneurs, your ideas are not big enough, right? When Larry and Sergey founded Google, I thought that they wanted to organize the web, but they said, we want to organize all the world's information, of which the web was just a little piece. So as young men, they started with a very broad vision. If you were doing a healthcare startup, you'd want to say, I want to increase life by 2 years, or I want to help cure a disease. Or you want to have very ambitious goals, so people are naturally drawn to your idea and excitement of solving some big problem, not a little problem.
I'd like to ask you a more personal question. Could you perhaps walk us through a typical day at Google for you, or is it just a stupid question because there is no typical day at Google?
Well, Google Alphabet is now a very large company. When I travel, what I try to do in a country in one day is I try to meet with the political leadership, I try to meet with the entrepreneurs, I try to meet with the press, and I try to meet with our Google employees who are in the country. And that's very efficient because in one day you can learn a lot about a country. In Google, we run the company through meetings which occur on Mondays and Tuesdays, and those Mondays are fairly standard. So in big companies, one of the things that happens is you get into a routine, and that's part of the predictability. We have 5-year plans, we have strategy. Indeed, I wrote a book called How Google Works, which talks about this.
You have, I believe, something like $70 billion of cash at hand. I mean, the company.
Yes, the company's shareholders, to be precise. The standard employee asks, why can't I have more of that? And we say, it's not your money, it's the shareholders' money.
But precisely, how do you think about capital allocation for Alphabet? How do you look at that, and how do you...
We do it on a company-by-company basis. So for example, Google Fiber is an attempt in the United States to build a very, very fast internet, which is doing extremely well, but it uses quite a bit of capital. So we discussed that, but we do it in the context of Google Fiber. So a properly run tech company that's large should generate cash. And indeed, one of the most interesting things about the American firms is that the sum of all of the tech companies has on the order of $1 trillion of cash sitting on its balance sheet, because when you build a company in one country, but you serve the globe, you get essentially you get economies of scale on your engineering. That's the way to understand it. So a globalized strategy for any company at scale should generate lots of positive cash flow.
We talked about artificial intelligence, we talked about health. What are the other areas where in the future you would see some progress coming from the research that is going on at Google, some of which is maybe not public yet, but what can you tell us on what you're working on today for the next years?
Let me start by saying that 5 years ago in Paris, I gave a speech where I talked about the importance of mobile phones, that Android and the iPhone would become successful, that Google Maps would be used for that, and it would become a huge platform. What it did not describe is Uber, Lyft, BlaBlaCar, all of the other apps that were created by that platform. So I'm quite convinced that there is a new platform emerging in the next 5 to 10 years that looks like this. It'll have Android and iPhone, and by the way, it's in that order. Android is much more popular than iPhone. Fast networks, and again, France, because of some very clever decisions by your government, has very fast broadband now, which I'm very proud of for the French people. And then these fast network servers, which do the machine learning. And I'm also convinced that the next generation of startups, the ones here, will do things with crowds that will learn from. I'll give you an example. So I know nothing about dermatology, I'm not a doctor, I know nothing about it. But so I decide to build an app and I pay $1 or €1 to dermatologists to take a picture of skin and describe the skin condition. So I'll do that for 1 million skin, million.
Yeah.
I can then use machine learning on the back end to build an app on the front end, and that app on the front end can diagnose skin cancer. So you see how, even though I'm an idiot when it comes to medicine, I'm not a doctor and so forth, I could build a business where all I do is I use the source, right, in this case, the knowledge of dermatologists to do this. I believe that almost every successful company in 5 to 10 years, if you will, the next Facebook, Uber, what have you, the next $50 billion corporation, will use that cycle of user knowledge, user classification to build it. We at Google are working very hard, not on that problem, but on the infrastructure problem. So we, excuse the technical terms, but there's a platform that we have called Google Brain. We released a library called TensorFlow, and if you're an engineer in the audience, you know what I'm talking about. And TensorFlow is a library that allows you to build these services, and we release this to our competitors. In specific, it's being used by all of our competitors to make their products better to compete with us. Why in the world would Google do that? And the answer is we're all in this together, and we all benefit from making this market larger. And we learned this a long time ago.
Europe is just waking up after the Brexit vote in the UK. I mean, first, do you understand the vote? And second, more importantly, are you thinking of maybe relocating some activities in continental Europe? How do you see these things moving?
I think it unlikely that Google would change our allocation based on this. We have large operations in Ireland, in Britain, in France, in Germany, in Zurich, and so forth and so on. You never know, but it would be hard for me to imagine that we would make much of a change. Certainly the British people have made their decision. My concern is that we have been working on the integrated policies for digital, and what I would hope is no matter what happens, and I'm not making a political comment here, no matter how the politics work out in Brussels and in France and Germany and in Britain, that we retain as common a platform as possible for digital. Europe has suffered by the splintering of the markets, and I don't want anything to splinter that market further. We want it to be the same or as close to the same as possible, because that gives entrepreneurs a bigger market. And so I'm always concerned when people are talking about more barriers. What we would hope is that there would be as great a harmonization and as great a unification as is possible.
But do you understand the vote?
No.
One, but one last question, because we have a few seconds left. Who's going to be the next president of the United States? I'm not asking for a name. Just tell us if it's going to be a woman or a man.
What I will tell you globally is that we're seeing, partly I think because of information flow, we're seeing real voices of frustration across all the political parties. Google does not take a position on the US presidency, nor on Brexit, nor on Britain, nor on the French
No, but
presidency.
I'm asking you personally.
Yes. I am personally well known to be a Hillary Clinton supporter, but that is not Google's position, that is my personal position.
Well, thank you, Eric. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Come again.
Thank you all.